Well, thank you very much for having me again. I was, it's always glad to be in a core meeting. It's not, but I was thinking that I did talk about LIBSENSE a lot, in the last AGM in Madrid. So I didn't want to bore everybody with that, but I would just sort of, discuss that a little bit. And then when we were when the topic repositories, repository networks and open science policies, it's Africa. So we are the last kids on the block. We're not as advanced as the other continents, but I'm really proud of what LIBSENSE is doing, thanks to the collaborators we have. I will talk about some of that. But what I wanted to show was how LIBSENSE is changing that landscape and how we are actually supporting these policies in Africa. So it's a Windows machine. That's right. No, that's not right. Oh, that's right, yes. So this is one slide. I want to use it to sort of describe what we do in LIBSENSE and what LIBSENSE, how LIBSENSE works in this area. So LIBSENSE, we could say we were a repository or a network of repository networks, but we're also slightly more. So because the community that's LIBSENSE was started out with NRENs. For those that are not familiar with NRENs, Red Clara in this region, you might be familiar with is a regional REN, but these constructs also exist at national level. So WACREN, where I come from, is a regional network. So WACREN is like Red Clara. So at some point in our evolution, we sort of realized that we're missing on the content. That's how LIBSENSE started. So it was NRENs who had no idea about open access in scholarly communications and all of that. And then library consortia, who had already started to do work in Africa, thanks to the likes of IFU, established library consortia, established repositories. So when we think of repository networks in Africa, they're actually the library consortia that have repositories established. So LIBSENSE emerged out of that. Initially was supporting the libraries, but then we became this initiative to expand open science in Africa, but principally to sort of establish that in the African context. So that's the bottom line, and that's really important. So we do this at different levels. There's capacity to be built at every level. So we're working on the campus level, we're working with countries, and at the regional level, because that's where we sit naturally. We have 3 working groups. So we work policy, infrastructure, our natural NREN, preserve, and then capacity building. Because of the nature of Africa, which I'm sure quite a few are familiar with, we have language diversity as well. So we work in French, which is most of my region, English, and Arabic. So I think you can see there that this was all started with the help of IFU and CORE, and the University of Sheffield, who had been working with in some research capacity. In terms of governance and finance, we haven't had so much of it. Most of the money has come from in-kind contributions from partners and some funding from a project that the 3 regional research networks in Africa have to interconnect countries in Africa. So I have to remember to be slow, thank you. Yeah. So in any case, the LIBSENSE is governed by these 3 research national networks. So the website has a lot more information, so anyone who's interested can actually look at that. But as far as policies are concerned, I thought, let's get the starting point really clear so you understand how much change we're actually bringing into this environment. So as it is in Africa today, there's only one country that we can say has an open science policy, but it's actually an open access policy, just that it has open science elements in it. And that's Ethiopia. So Ethiopia has had, again, IFU supported, so you hear IFU a lot, but supported the country in a project, and they have an open access policy that has open science elements. I sort of put that on the screen. And they have a national repository in where all of this that drives this open science policy. In South Africa, and I was really, although I say existing national open science policies, that's why I've highlighted that it's a draft. It is not been, I don't think the process is complete yet, but they had started in 2022 with a consultation. South Africa is relatively advanced. So it does have repositories, infrastructure, and all of that, but the policy they don't have a policy yet. But they have the draft. It's going through a process, and they want to establish a national forum to get all the stakeholders involved. That's the background. One policy in the entire country. So what I want to do here is tell you how LIBSENSE engages with the whole policy development. We have two main tracks of activity. First of all, we believe that all of this, this open science as a whole, whether it is, policy, capacity building, or even infrastructure, that is best, at national level. Our experience is showing that it is when the stakeholders are more coherent and can drive agenda better at national level than any other level. So there are some initiatives that are supposedly continental. We don't see that as in itself, it's just not viable because of the diversity of opinion, because of the sort of the natural boundaries that data policies, for instance, or sovereignty issues that arise, whether they're real or they're not, they create this scenario where it works best at national level. So I think our main flagship activity there is what we call in the National Open Science Roadmaps. And essentially, it's to support the countries to develop national open science policies and a roadmap to actually implementing that. And we have been quite successful there. So really what we do is we have this big event where we bring all the stakeholders in the whole scholarly communication and research environment. And we use it to raise awareness about open science, the benefits, and to connect to people generally. And then offer the technical support and training that actually helps them develop these policies to their own specific needs. One of our concerns is that, if we don't do this, what we will see is countries importing policies and thinking from other parts. And from an African perspective, that would just be disastrous. And we're seeing it happen by some other parties. So this effort has been trying to sort of make that less impactful. Oh, the last bullet is not complete, but yes, we have, this started out during the COVID, I think it was 2020, early 2020. But since then, and we couldn't move very much at the time, but since then we've been able to do 6 countries, and I will talk about the latest 2 in another slide. On a regional level, just again, we have these policy development workshops. Now this is a collaboration with UNESCO and regional organizations that promote higher education and research in Africa. So some of these are networks of universities. In some cases, there are government establishments established to drive regional education. This particular thrust of activity is towards decision makers responsible for, or who should be responsible for implementing open science policies. So if you think the national open science roadmaps connect the ministries, the governments, and all the other stakeholders in space, whether they are, hardware related or in some cases, citizen science sort of proponents, the regional policy workshops really are targeted at getting activity on campus to meet the national open science roadmaps. So essentially, if you build at the national level, but there is no capacity or culture change at the campus level, then you would have, from the NREN perspective, infrastructures that will develop and roll out that nobody would use or won't have the incentives to use. So that's the focus. The current focus is taking the UNESCO Open Science recommendations, bringing these university leaders together and discussing how we take the high-level goals and actually practically come up with ways to implement them on campus. So the current focus is reforming African science policies and incentive infrastructure. So when you said research assessment, yeah, it's a big global issue. And I also think it's a minefield. I'm seeing, and we're following the discussion and the different opinions and wanting to take a step back and look at it from a purely African point of view and come up with those sort of solutions as well. So I thought I would just tell you a little bit of what we've done since Madrid, because that's what I thought the idea was. So in October, we got some, because we've been pushing this out, we got some money from the UK Foreign Commonwealth Development Organization to host one of these national events in Ghana. So typically what we try to do with these events is to work with government, drive it with the library consortium, which has the most capacity in the country, and then the NREN, and bring the NREN in, who we want to provide shared infrastructure so that we can sort of leapfrog our current situation. So those were the partners in Ghana. The Ghanaian event was quite timely because there was an ongoing review of the science and technology policy, the national policy. So what we have been able to do since October is to introduce open science elements very broadly into that policy, which is now going through a consultation with the stakeholders. The same thing has happened in Botswana. In Botswana, that was interesting because that actually stemmed out of the Ubuntu Alliance, is the regional research network for South and East Africa. So they were having their annual meeting in this country. So LIBSENSE, the LIBSENSE members in the country we got in touch with them and sort of leveraged that opportunity to have that conference, the LIBSENSE meeting there. And that's actually, because they're all so different. In Botswana, for instance, they had an RDA meeting in 2017. So out of that meeting, there was some conversation about an open data policy, which didn't go past. They had some documentation, but it didn't go past that point. So the LIBSENSE event sort of rejuvenated all of that activity. So now they have an open science policy, which they have completed, drafted with the help of the LIBSENSE community, which they want to submit to Parliament in June. They're also working on, against our best advice, an open data, what they call an open data, open science policy, which is a little bit slower. But we see that by June, all of this will be resolved. In Tunisia, in October, we did the same, similar. So the university, this is in French, but the English version is, English translation is University National Center for Scientific and Technical Documentation. It's also another network, so to speak. It's just that it is not distributed in the sense that the government has one platform for everybody in the country. So it's like a shared repository. So they're also driving the agenda in Tunisia. So that actual event was with the ministry and this repository network. In this case, there's not been any real outcome, but there's been a lot of awareness raised, and we see that as sort of driving on forward. So I thought that's really all I had to share. But I thought, so if you have any questions.
Great, are there any questions for Omo?
Some t-shirt.
Nuevamente no es una... ok.
Thank you.
Nuevamente no es una pregunta, es un comentario. Yo creo que es muy loable la tarea que estás haciendo. y nuevamente recurrimos a las sinergias y a la colaboración. Es muy grande lo que estás haciendo. Te veo cargando una carga de verdad gigante, pero lo estás haciendo y eso es lo importante. No quedarnos quietos a pesar de todo, ¿sí? Estás ahorita en un periodo de concientización para la gente, ¿verdad? De África y de niños y demás, pero creo que es muy loable lo que te quería decir. Felicidades.
Thank you very much, Namo. But we're also standing on the shoulders of giants. So Core and IFU have been actually very helpful in giving us some momentum.
I see Bianca with her hand up.
Omo, mis congratulaciones por todo el trabajo que se está haciendo en África. Yo creo que es un modelo para nuestros países del sur. Y también yo creo que es muy importante que hagamos muchas alianzas, porque nuestras situaciones de nuestros países son bastante semejantes. Y en este sentido, me pareció genial la alianza, la referencia y las redes africanas, porque sí tenemos que reunir los esfuerzos y también conocer las buenas prácticas que hacemos principalmente con los pocos, en general, recursos que tenemos para realizar toda la infraestructura de ciencia abierta. Congratulaciones.
Thank you very much, Bianca. I know we don't have very much time, so I would just sort of speed that up. But yes, we already have a collaboration with La Referencia, brokered by, guess who? Cool, so just I thought everybody knew. So yes, we have a partnership already. We have, as part of the early work we did, we discovered that in the northern part of Africa, there was a lot of Arabic content that needed more visibility. So some of what, I don't need that now. Some of what we're doing is leveraging the harvester from La Ferencia in the first pilots. And that's going to be for Arabic. But in the coming months, and probably by next year, we're also looking at, using the harvester for the other languages. So, and that is only the beginning. In our research assessment discussions, we have contacted FOLEC, and there's also conversation going on there. So yes, because we agree, the South-South collaboration is as important, if not more important, than collaborating with enough.
I say something before we let you go, because I think my experience in working in Africa through the LIBSENSE project is that the dialogue in the global north is very singular. So African Open Science Cloud, African Open Science Platform. And the reality is on the ground is very different, that things will advance at the national level. There are national policies. Infrastructure is funded at the national level. And the likelihood of a continental platform being funded and being sustainable over time is very unlikely. So I think the strategy of LIBSENSE is probably, I agree with you, is the most effective strategy for advancing things. And we, of course, EIFL has been critical for the discussions and the LIBSENSE activities, because you have been on the ground there, working for many years, Irina. So with that, thank you very much, Omo.
Thank you very much.